يلا يلا.
There are no signs for them. You won't see them on tourist maps. But if you know where to look, if you remember where to look, you can find them, and hundreds like them across Israel.
كلها مهدمينها ورايحة. هذا بيتنا هون.
هون بيتنا؟
هون.
مش فاهم عليك.
100%.
كيف؟
هون البيت.
To know the stories of these ruined towns and villages is to understand the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. To learn their stories, you must go back to a year that none in the region will ever forget, though some have tried.
It's a black hole. I don't want to think about it.
The feeling of you have a state of your own, a Jewish state, no one have ever lived such a situation.
It's such a grave injustice, and that is really what hurts you. It's a grave injustice that has not been at all attended to and taken care of.
Only when I answered your question, I knew about it. Yes. I know that I don't want to think about 48.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict can seem impossible to comprehend. By looking at the year that most changed the lives of Israelis and Palestinians, 1948, it becomes possible to understand the forces that drive this conflict today. For Israelis, 1948 was a year of creation. The terrible injustices Jews had faced throughout the world would finally come to an end with the realization of their long sought-after solution, a Jewish state in Palestine. For Palestinians, 1948 was a catastrophe. That one year saw the destruction of hundreds of Palestinian villages and towns, their inhabitants replaced by outsiders from Europe and Russia, and most Palestinians would never see their home again. In the 1800s, Jews across Europe and Russia suffered persecution in many forms. Racial stereotypes of Jews were rampant. Movements called for boycotting Jewish businesses. In many places, Jews were not allowed to attend universities, were forced to live in certain neighborhoods, and were prevented from entering roles in government. In other places, whole towns would rise up against their Jewish populations and attack them en masse, resulting in looting, robbery, rape, and massacres. Jews began to look for a way to end their suffering. Some came up with the idea to bring all of the Jewish people out of Europe and settle in a place where they could finally be secure. The place they chose was Palestine, and the movement, formed at the end of the 19th century, became known as Zionism.
We were Zionists. We were for building a homeland.
Well, what the Jews did in their little circles and societies abroad, which promoted Zionism, as it came to be called, is they gathered some money and then they sent off a family or a group of 20 people or whatever to Palestine. They bought little chunks of land and established small settlements.
הרוח הייתה בהחלט של רוח של תקווה ושל התלהבות והרגשה שפה בונים משהו.
Europeans had been colonizing land across the globe for centuries, and Zionism would follow in that tradition. But there was a problem that was overlooked by a popular Zionist slogan about Palestine.
A people without land for a land without people. Okay, so they wanted to give the Jews a land because they didn't have land. But the problem is that the land they gave them had people. It was inhabited by Palestinians for thousands of years.
When Zionist settlers began arriving in the 1880s, the Palestinian population already numbered around 450,000 Arabs and 20,000 Jews.
كانوا اليهود موجودين يهود حقيقيين من اليهود اللي غير متطرفين، يعني كانوا مستقيمين وكانوا يعرفوا إنه أنا إلي حق إني أعيش هون مثل ما إله هو حق يعيش هون.
لما اجوا هذول تبعين الغرب هن اللي خربوا الدنيا وهجرونا.
During World War I, the Zionist movement scored a major victory. The British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour declared support for the creation of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. A few weeks later, the British Army conquered Jerusalem and began implementing the Balfour Declaration. In the early years of the movement, calls for removing Arabs from Palestine were not often made publicly by Zionist leaders. But as larger and larger groups of Jews began arriving in the country, discussions about encouraging the native population to leave by purchasing their land or through other means began to spill into the open. In the 1920s, thousands of Arabs became homeless after Zionists purchased their land out from under them by making deals with wealthy landlords from nearby countries. The rise of Hitler in the 1930s led to a massive increase in Jewish immigration to Palestine. The Arabs watched the arrival of more and more Zionists, saw the growing number of those who had lost their homes, and heard pronouncements by some Zionist leaders that they had plans to one day outnumber the Arabs.
The Arabs revolted. In 36, 39, they revolted against the British and against the Zionist presence.
The leadership of the Zionist movement and the leadership of the Palestinian Arab population. They both have made the same diagnosis of their situation, and this is what they understand, that the establishment of any type of Jewish state in any part of Palestine where there was going to be a Jewish majority necessarily required the large-scale displacement of Palestinian Arabs.
Early Zionism thought you can actually buy the Palestinians out. You can buy bits of the land here, you push them out, gradually you push them into Transjordan. By the mid-30s, the key figures within the leadership realized the only way to do it is to do it on a mass scale, to engineer it.
In 1940, Yosef Weitz wrote in his diary, "The only way is to transfer the Arabs from here to neighboring countries. All of them, except perhaps Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Old Jerusalem. Not a single village or a single tribe must be left." As the Second World War broke out, flight from Europe only became more desperate. Yosef ben Eliezer ended up in Palestine after being forced out of Poland by the Nazis.
We were ordered to go out from the town. The SS were standing around us, and mothers with children, old people, handicapped, everyone, the whole mass of people moving towards the River Seine. In there we were searched for all valuables, and they were taken away from us.
Poland, there were 25 children in my class. Two of us remained after the war. All the rest were killed.
I had a view that we are fighting for survival, and that if we will not fight, we will experience here a second Holocaust, which may have been not objective, but that's what I felt at the time.
In Palestine, even before World War II began, it was clear that war was on the horizon. After crushing the Arab revolt and exiling the leaders of the Arab community, the British decided to take some action to address the concerns of Arabs in Palestine.
And this pushed the British into gradually stopping Jewish immigration, What this meant to the Jews was that the path of achieving statehood through majority, through gaining a Jewish majority here, was blocked.
At the time, there were two Zionist militias in Palestine. The Haganah was far larger and better equipped, but the Irgun was more radical. The Irgun refused to accept the British decision to restrict immigration into the country.
So we started to fight against them.
My father was at the doorstep of the building and looked at his watch, and he said, "It's too early now. I'm going to come and have lunch at the YMCA anyway." Just as soon as he left, he hardly got away, a kilometer away, and the building was gone.
The King David Hotel was the headquarters of the British government in Palestine. Its bombing in 1946 by the Irgun was by far the largest attack in the Zionist campaign against the British and was a massive shock to Palestine. It left 91 people dead, including Britons, Arabs, and Jews.
My mother came to us and she said, go on your knees and thank the Lord that your father was spared.
In the 1940s, the Haganah began preparing for the coming war with the Arabs by creating files on the hundreds of Arab villages and neighborhoods across Palestine.
We used to spy, you might call it, on the Arab villages around to prepare ourselves for the day in which we knew will come, when the British leave, that the fight will not be against the British, but between the Jews and the Arabs. So we used to build up files of pictures and details about the villages so they can be attacked when the point will come. And as at the age of 18, even less 17, I was already part of such an operation.
In 1947, the British gave up on trying to find a solution between the Zionist settlers and the native population. Exhausted from World War II, the British declared that they would leave Palestine and handed the problem over to the United Nations. At the UN, a committee decided that the best way forward was to split Palestine in two, giving one state to the Jews and the other to the Arabs. Jerusalem would become a separate entity administered by the UN. The Jewish community in Palestine had skyrocketed throughout the Zionist movement. But in 1947, it still only represented 1/3 of Palestine's population and owned less than 7% of the land. The United Nations Partition Plan called for giving 56% of the country to the Jewish state. This proposal shocked the Arab community. Not only would the Jews receive over half of Palestine, but they were also receiving most of the land suitable for farming.
Nobody felt that this was a fair deal.
The overwhelming majority, more than 55% of a country that had a 2/3 Arab majority, was being given over to the minority. And the area that would have been given to the minority was almost equal in population between Arabs and Jews. So there was a negative reaction to the partition of the country at all. People felt it's a single country, it shouldn't be partitioned. But then the specifics of the partition were found unjust and unequal in the minority was being given most of the country.
But in the wake of the Holocaust, world leaders felt compelled to do something for the Jewish people. In the United States, President Truman was facing re-election and intense lobbying by Zionist leaders. As a result of those pressures, he began supporting the UN partition plan.
Truman, you might say, unleashed American diplomats to threaten certain countries. So you change your vote or else. And it worked. The vote passed to have partition.
That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Partition passed, 33-13. And is this crowd excited? They're starting their horror dances now. All over the square, little circles are forming. People are laughing and crying and shouting and whirling around in the wild horror dance.
The only time I remember in my life that I really seen a total happiness. I mean, everyone was dancing and everyone was happy, because it was a dream fulfilled.
ההרגשה של היישוב כולו הייתה של שמחה גדולה מאוד. הייתי ברמת יוחנן, כן, כולם רקדו בחדר האוכל, אני אפילו לא יצאתי.
I disliked it. From the beginning, I disliked it.
כי ידעתי שאחרי ההחלטה הזאת העניינים לא יסתדרו ותהיה מלחמה.
And they said, we are not going to accept this, we're going to fight. Because this is our country and we're not going to leave it. And we're not going to let anybody take part of it even.
Jerusalem rioters started fires in many parts of the city. Casualties amount to more than a score killed on both sides. But Palestine's most critical period has yet to come. With British troops away from the trouble center, it remains to be seen whether a threatened full-scale war will materialize.
بدنا سلاح نقوم فيه. صار كل واحد يتبرع باللي عنده.
فكنا نطلع على الجبل نقابل وين بطريق يطلعوا منها اليهود علينا. وأنا من الناس اللي أخذوا بارودة طليانية مع 5 فشكات.
Now, when we came to a village, and then was a barrier of stones, I was afraid. I had all a bus on my responsibility. Then they began to try to climb on there, and I shot, and I hit maybe 3, 4, I don't know how many.
في يوم من الأيام إجت مجموعة يهود ودخلوا على البلد في الليل ولغموا بيوت ونسفوهن وقتلوا أهلهن. ومن هناك بدأت المعركة بين أهل البلد وبينهم يعني. فصاروا أهل البلد يشتروا أسلحة فاهم ويقاوموا.
Because the British ran the government of Palestine, neither the Jews nor the Arabs had an official army. However, by 1947, the Haganah, the militia of the mainstream Zionist parties, had become a well-developed force of 35,000 to 40,000 fighters, nearly 4 times more than the poorly equipped Arab militias.
The only Palestinian leader at the time was someone named Abdul Qadir al-Husseini. And he was quite effective in rallying people to his cause.
Oh, he was a force to be reckoned with. He had a big following. He was a fighter, a freedom fighter.
اليهود كانوا يعملوا انفجارات. هلا احنا تعلمنا منهم الانفجارات.
صاروا يزتوا تفجيرات براميل يدحلوها من شارع يافا الأبين من فوق تيجي عنا يافا. بقى خافت العالم. هذا الشيء اللي خوف العالم. صاروا يهربوا. قالوا
Haifa refinery was one of these rather rare cases where you had Jewish and Arab workers working together. So the Irgun members drove by the oil refinery one day and threw a bomb into a rather large group of Palestinian Arab workers standing outside of the break. The Palestinians then responded against their fellow Jewish workers.
صار معركة في الشمالية بالريفينري راح طرب من اليهود القتلة.
There was a revolt there, and the Arabs said about the Jewish workers. We got called out there. Terrible disaster. Bodies all over the place.
ואז יצאנו לפעולת תגמול, נקרא לזה, על כפר ערבי שנקרא בלד אל-שייח. ירינו, הם ירו עלינו, נהרג שם ובחור על ידי ואני ועוד חבר הוצאנו אותו, לא היה לנו אפילו אלונקות אלא על הכתפיים.
The retaliation at Balad el-Sheikh left dozens of Arab men, women, and children dead. It had been 4 weeks since the announcement of the UN partition plan. The British had announced that they would complete the evacuation of Palestine on the 15th of May. Zionist leaders began preparing for a Jewish state. On March 10th, the Haganah adopted Plan Dalet, also known as Plan D. This plan outlined an overall strategy for the Jewish militia. Its stated goal was to prepare the coming Hebrew state to defend itself once the British Army had left. But historians strongly disagree about the intentions of the plan.
It's geared, and it says that it's geared, to securing the Jewish state and the border areas and the main roads between the Jewish urban concentrations, to securing the Jewish state in advance of the Arab invasion.
It's completely ridiculous. I mean, it's very clear that Plan Dalet was a plan not just to take over, but to empty of their population all of these villages and cities. Now, were there people who understood that writing down on paper, we will expel this population, was probably not a wise thing to do? Yes. But was there a clear intention implemented to the letter to expel the populations, and more importantly, not to let them return? There was.
The most important part of Plan D was the set of orders that came outside of Plan D. The orders were strikingly clear and unambiguous, and used the word letaher in Hebrew, which is to cleanse, or to destroy, which is lehashmid, or to expel, which is legaresh. I think the role of the historian is to fuse these military orders with the plan itself, and then you get an idea of the intention and the implementation.
Under Plan D, the Haganah began organizing large-scale military operations. The first, Operation Nachshon, took place over 2 weeks in April. The goal of Nachshon was to end attacks on Jewish convoys by clearing out Arab villages on the road to Jerusalem.
The villages were defended in most cases by forces, maybe 30 people, 40 people, who were not trained, who were not organized, were not defended by any trenches or things like that. And the conquest in all the places that I participated was an easy game.
During Operation Nachshon, the Haganah captured the strategically located Arab village of Kastal. Arab fighters attempted to retake the village in a counterattack led by Abdel Qadir al-Husseini.
He came with a huge number of people, and they started to climb up the mountain. And so we shot one of us, I think it was Nelson, he killed Abdul Qadir by mistake. And we saw this man with a big kafia and his very elegant clothes, but we didn't know who he was. And then the Arabs made the biggest mistake in the War of Independence. Instead of taking the castle and keep the road closed, they went to Jerusalem to the funeral of Abdul Qadir al-Husseini.
كنا في القدس أنا وأبوي، والكل كان يبكي لأنه هذا رمز القضية الفلسطينية.
Just 2 miles from Kastal lay the Arab village of Deir Yassin. Early in the morning of April 9th, the same day as the funeral of al-Husseini, fighters from the Irgun set out for the village. Deir Yassin was one of many Arab villages that had signed a peace agreement with a neighboring Jewish village, so they did not expect an attack. The Haganah intelligence officer who reported on Deir Yassin was Mordechai Gichon.
Deir Yassin were only citizens. The village was completely peaceful.
أخوي رحمة الله عليه محمود ضرب، سمع الصوت ولا ضرب من أكم منطلق، ويعني 12 ساعة متتالية وهم يقاتلوا اليهود.
A number of Arabs died resisting the attack, but a far larger group lost their lives well after the battle had ended. In all, Jewish fighters killed about 110 Arabs at Deir Yassin, most of them women, children, and the elderly.
People were mutilated. Hand grenades were simply thrown into houses. Women and children were killed, bodies stuffed down wells, jewelry stripped off fingers, fingers cut off, earlobes cut off.
رحت أنا ماشي بعرق الحيط مش من الشارع الرئيسي، من البساتين. الفرن له شباك على جهة، ولا اليهود في الفرن، والنسوان قعدات على الأرض، وكل واحدة قاعدة وحاطة إيديها على راسها هيك، وبقولوا للفران ارمي ابنك بالفرن، ارمي ابنك بالفرن، اسمه حامد. قال له أنا ما برمي ابني. قال له شويه. هم ضربوا الحاج حامد على راسه ومسكوا الولد رموه بالفرن. أنا شفت هالمنظر، شفت هالمنظر ما تمش فيها حيل من مرة يعني. بعدين مسكوا الأب حطوه وراه، قالوا له الحق ابنك. أنا اجيت عديت قلت هلا بيمسكوني، قمت أركض.
After the massacre, they took the people which remained, they took them in a car and went through Jerusalem.
Irgun trucks full of survivors paraded up and down streets in Jewish neighborhoods. Spectators mocked, spit at, and even stoned the villagers.
It was very ugly. After these things, I did not know if I am a Zionist.
After the attack, the Haganah sent men to cover up the atrocities.
They came to me and gave me a platoon of soldiers and told me, go there and make order. And so I came there and I was shuddering because I see how the dead were strewn and they were eating sandwiches with marmalade. For some time I couldn't eat marmalade after that. And then I told them, look here, I'm going to fire and shoot and kill you if you don't clean this up. And so they made graves and buried them, and a few they threw in a well, and everything was apparently clean. And then everything looked peaceful.
But the massacre was not over. Some villagers remained in Deir Yassin, hiding in their homes. For 2 days, Irgun fighters searched for survivors.
مروا مرتين ثلاث ما عرفوش، والله ما شافونا، لولا الولد صار يبكي. أخذوا عزمي صرنا نبكي لأنه ولد أدنى. قال هذا بيبي رجعوه. كمان شباب صفوهم على الحيط حوالي 15 واحد ورشوهم قدامنا. إحنا حملونا في بيكب. لما وصلنا المنطقة اللي بين العرب واليهود طلع لي واحد عينين زرق حلو، شخصية محترمة، أبو 18 سنة. قلت له بالله عليك أنت عربي؟ قال لي تفضل ما تخافش أنتوا عند العرب هلأ.
Most of the images of the Deir Yassin massacre are in the archives of the Israeli army. The archive refuses to release many of the images and intelligence reports on Deir Yassin, despite being well past the 50-year embargo for classified documents.
Looking back, I'm still, after all those years, very much shocked, and I feel it is a disgrace on the Jewish state and of the Israelis.
مذبحة دير ياسين كانت هي الحافز الأكبر للقرى اللي تشرد وتهرب بأولادها وأطفالها وبناتها ونسوانها.
قالوا أخذوا البنات يعني وفضعوا فين وسووا كذا وعملوا كذا. هذا اللي خلانا إحنا نشرد.
The massacre at Deir Yassin was far from the only massacre of the war, but it was the most widely publicized.
تسمع كل القرى في مذبحة دير ياسين.
دير ياسين. دير ياسين.
معركة دير ياسين. مزدرب دير ياسين.
دير ياسين. أحداث دير ياسين.
By far the most massacres, rapes, atrocities, etc., were committed by Israelis, particularly after 1948 independence, than by Palestinians or by Arabs.
The Jewish offensive continued.
The normal procedure was that the Haganah would begin by a short barrage of either light mortars or 3-inch mortars. Most of these villages were within citrus orchards, so we could come closer by going between the trees of the orchards. As we deployed the width of the front with my platoon, say, in front of the houses, we gave a 1-minute coordinated shot of whatever weapons we had and stormed. And in at least 2 or 3 of these places, when we came into the houses, there was nobody there. There was still coffee on the pot. You could see people lived there until a few minutes ago. They ran into the orchards and hid there and waited to see what happens. And if they tried to come back, they were shot at.
Haifa was the second largest city in Palestine, and its port served as the main exit point for the evacuating British army. So there were a large number of British troops there.
Well, Haifa was a mountain town, straddled Mount Carmel. The Arab population tended to live down at sea level. So there was a lot of shooting going, sniping, rifle fire, and bombs and things.
واستمر القصف واستمرت الاشتباكات بيننا وبينهم لليهود. بهاي الفترة اليهود دمروا بيت المنجرة اللي كنت أروح ألعب عندها أنا، منجرة بيت حمود. دمروا البناية تبعتهم، دمروها، لغموها ودمروها. بتصور دمروها لأنه كانت أعلى من البنايات تبعت اليهود، فكان يطلع منها قنص واشتباك طاخ.
وجابوا سيارة مفخخة وحطوها عند مطعم وفجروها، وراح 9 قتلى ويمكن حوالي 20 جريح. مثل شغلة هذه السيارة المفخخة هاي ما بنساها أنا، هاي كنت راح أروح فيها أنا.
اجا ابوي اخذنا كلياتنا، انا واخوي واولاد عمي واولاد عمتي، ما خلى حدا. يلا شو في؟ قال يلا. سكرت المدرسة، اخذنا واذا في اشتباكات بيننا وبين اليهود.
On April 19th, the British decided to pull out of downtown Haifa. Just hours after the withdrawal was complete on the 21st, the Haganah went into action.
The operation, with its very ominous name, cleansing the leaven. Leaven is the bread that is left before Passover. And as a Jew, you are supposed to clean even the last crumb. Now, if you apply it to people, you understand that the idea is to cleanse every person who lived in Haifa.
The Jewish attack on Haifa was accompanied by a massive, indiscriminate bombardment by mortars. The Haganah also used loudspeaker trucks to broadcast recordings of shrieks, gunfire, explosions, and calls to flee for your lives. This tactic was used in many places by Jewish militias in 1948.
كانت تمشي دبابة ب4 عجال نشرت، الأولاد الصغار يخافوا، الحريم تخاف، العالم تخاف، كله خداع، لأنه كانوا بس بدهم يخوفونا، يطلعونا، بدهم يطلعونا.
In Haifa, the Jewish attack continued. Unlike in other towns and villages, Haifa's mayor, Shabtai Levi, actually pleaded with the Arabs to stay.
And he said, don't leave, stay here, we want you here, you belong here, don't leave.
But there's no reason for them to believe him. So you had one person pleading for them to say, but what they were hearing from all sides, and they had little to defend themselves with, was that they were going to be massacred.
This British intelligence report describes the attack on Haifa. there was considerable congestion outside the East Gate of hysterical and terrified Arab women and children and old people, on whom the Jews opened up on mercilessly with fire.
We went out near the Haifa airport, what we call the trade school bullet, and we could see these poor old families, convoys of them, Arabs, cars and vehicles all going up to Lebanon. Very, very sad.
صار يطلعوا بالبحر. احنا رحنا صرنا نجيب بالمراكب نجيب ناس من حيفا على عكا. اليهود عندهم زوارق حربية يضحكوا علينا، يضحكوا انه شو يعني طلقتين ثلاثة بروح له شيء كذا.
Prior to the war, Haifa had been home to 70,000 Jews and 65,000 Arabs. By May, all but 4,000 of the Arabs had fled the city.
We wanted to intervene in it, but we weren't allowed to. As simple as that. Simple as that.
The Arab city of Jaffa would be the target of the next Zionist offensive. Jaffa was immediately adjacent to the Jewish city of Tel Aviv and home to the other major port in Palestine.
When the clashes started, nobody was prepared to fight in Jaffa. No arms, no militia, no administration, no leadership, no organization.
وباستمرار في الليل إطلاق النار باستمرار من اليهود ومن العرب. يدخل جيب في وراء 4 مثلا جنود أو عسكر أو المهم معهم أسلحة. كان في منهم يطلق النار عشوائي على الشعب اللي في الطرق يعني هيك.
היינו הולכים לבית ספר וחוזרים, היינו הולכים ליד הקירות כדי, אני אומרת לך, לא להיפגע. והייתה פגיעה אחת ישירה בבית סמוך אלינו, שם נהרגה אישה ונפצעו כמה אנשים. וזה היה קרוב לחג הפסח של 48, אז פינו את כל השכונה וגם אותנו.
On the 25th of April, the Irgun launched a major offensive on Jaffa. It had been 2 weeks since Irgun fighters had committed the massacre at Deir Yassin.
I was a company commander on the attack of Jaffa. 600 warriors were in all. The first 2 days, it was a chaos.
Nearly all our neighbors left. I was 16 years old. I told my father, I'm not leaving from here. Why? I'm not leaving from here. We stay here. Either we die here or we live here.
On the first day of the attack on Jaffa, the Irgun commander, Amichai Paglin, had made his objectives clear. To prevent constant military traffic in the city, to break the spirit of the enemy troops, and to cause chaos among the civilian population in order to create a mass flight. On the third day, he succeeded.
يوم بنتساش يعني قعدنا بالجوع بدنا اكل طلعنا تحت القصف الواحد فاضي ياخذ اكل ولا يهرب بروحه لما بكون نازل الشتاء زي الشتاء القذيف على البيت ايش فاضي يحمل الواحد ما قدر نحمل شيء يعني يلا مصريات يقدر يهرب فيهم
4 or 5 mortars were down in front of our home in the old city of Jaffa. Then my father told me, what are you waiting for? It's only a matter of week time. We can go, we come back.
The people of Jaffa left half by force, I would say. The Egyptians used to bomb Jaffa again and again. People ran away. We also told from mouth to ear that if the Jews will enter, it will be a terrible slaughter. So they ran away.
فرشتين والحكين وطلعنا بالمركب وكانت والضاء صار يضربوا علينا بال 120 على المركب كمان في 75 عيلة 100 عيلة كانت ركبنا بالمركب قعدنا حوالي 3 أيام بالبحر.
Anwar Sakka still remembers walking through Jaffa's streets before war broke out.
I used to see the ships, sometimes 30 to 40 ships outside the marina. When you go downtown, walking from the college for about 10 minutes, you go to the center of Jaffa, where you have the tower, the clock tower. Then you go down to a main street, a fashion street, where boutiques, fashionable boutiques existed. There were also in Jaffa cinemas. One of them was the Alhambra cinema. It's all constructed of white marble. Inside is all furnished with red carpets and red velvet.
Today, at his home in a refugee camp, Yusuf al-Arwadi still keeps a collection of documents to remind him of his life in Jaffa. After the Irgun attack, Jaffa's pre-war population of 75,000 Arabs would soon be reduced to just 4,100.
It's not easy when you found yourself in a moment, losing everything. Your family, your home, your business, your school, your past, everything completely, and thrown out in the street to nowhere.
In late April and early May, the Haganah launched a series of additional operations across Palestine. In a few places, Arab fighters managed to organize a strong defense.
And there was one very crucial fight on San Simon, which is a monastery, Jerusalem. We fought and they were winning. Some of the wounded people were lying there on top of dynamites in case we have to withdraw. We cannot take all of them. They will kill themselves. And then at the end, there was something happened that no one knows what. And they started to withdraw. And that saved Jerusalem.
The Jewish settlements that made up the Etzion block south of Jerusalem fared much worse. An Arab assault destroyed all 4 settlements. 129 Jews died, many of whom were massacred after their surrender. It would be the worst Jewish defeat of the war. But by and large, the final weeks of the British Mandate went in favor of the Jews. By mid-May, 250 to 400,000 Arabs had fled their homes. Between a third and half of all refugees who would leave Palestine during the war left before the British completed their evacuation on May 14th. That same day, the Zionist dream became reality as David Ben-Gurion, the leader of the Jewish people in Palestine, read the Declaration of Independence.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.
With the declaration of the state, the Jews of Palestine would now be called Israelis. The Arabs of the country would continue to refer to themselves as Palestinians. Massive celebrations broke out in Tel Aviv, but many Israeli fighters had a different reaction.
In the declaration of the state, I was not happy. I did not dance Yes, and I said it will be trouble.
With refugees pouring into their countries, Arab leaders could no longer ignore the crisis in Palestine. The day after the British left, units of the Egyptian, Jordanian, Syrian, Iraqi, and Lebanese armies entered the war.
There was a strong sense of fear. We knew that we don't have airplanes, we don't have tanks yet.
This week's news includes pictures in Palestine taken from the Arab side. They show troops of the Arab Legion consolidating gains in a Jewish district of Jerusalem, where much of the heaviest fighting in recent days took place. Fires continued to add to the very considerable destruction already caused in the city, and at this time, at any rate, there seemed little prospect of calling a halt to the Arab-Jewish war.
It turned out now that there was one period in the war in which the Arabs had a superiority of power, and that was in May, when the Arab armies invaded Palestine and had weapons for which we didn't have an answer. But the general notion among Israelis, especially veterans of my age, the whole war was like that.
But if you calculate, as we did, the number of troops just in the Palestine theater, there are more Israeli fighters than there were Arab fighters.
The armies that these states had were very small, and they were poorly trained, because these states had been occupied by European powers, either the British or the French. The best troops were the Jordanian troops, the Arab Legion. Abdullah of Transjordan had made a deal. He wanted the West Bank, what had been allotted to the Palestinians in the UN plan. He wanted that for himself. And he promised then not to attack, and the Zionists agreed with that. Except for the battle for Jerusalem, which was to erupt, the Israeli army didn't really have to worry that much about a Jordanian attack. They could focus on the Iraqis, the Lebanese, the Syrians, who themselves were divided, and the Egyptians.
I don't think any one of the military commanders in the Arab world had any illusion that they would be able to defeat the Jewish state. But of course, to the public, they told that they would take Tel Aviv and so on, but I think that they were quite realistic people, and they knew the balance of power as anyone else among the leaders knew it.
The intervention of the Arab armies did not stop the attacks on Palestinian Arab towns and villages. The next day, Israelis began their final assault on the town of Acre. Palestinians poured into boats to flee the attack.
قمنا الصبح لقينا عكا محتلة. والله طلعت لقيت مخ جوزي ومخ ابن عمي على الدرج. ويشهد الله. أنا ساعتها ما عدت شوعي.
It was the first time I saw the ugly part of the war. Until then, war was dangerous, but it was not ugly.
في بنت عند خالها. أنا ما شفت، بس أبوي وأمي شافوا. قالوا اليهود فاتوا افتعلوا فيها. وقتلوا خالها، ليش خالها حكى قتلوه. ولما صوتها تصرخ وخالها كلهم خافوا من الله ويصيح، أنا صرت أنتق، كل أبوي يابا وطي صوتك يابا لا يجوا كمان، بكفي راحوا جزانك أحسن ما يجوا يابا يفعلوا فيك، وأبوي عمره 70 سنة. ولي زمان ما سمعت النزر فيه. وبكل محماس عالدلي والبريق، بكل فنجان تا منه انتهى. أخليكي قدر ما عادش فيه.
We went and we were moving around this village, Aquant. The door was open and we entered. Under the table there was a pair of small shoes. They were eating, and then somebody told them to go away quickly. I didn't have time to put on the shoes on the baby. This part of the war, I have seen it the first time. This war is not a war of soldiers, it's a war of people, of children. And I started crying. The child needs his shoes. We need to send the shoes to the child. Where can he be?
The United Nations called for a truce. It began on the 11th of June.
We were very, very, very happy. And we hope that we will not fight later on.
During the first truce, the Arabs didn't do very much, whereas the leaders of the new state of Israel were extremely energetic in recruiting more troops, in training them, and most importantly, in illicitly importing arms from the Eastern Bloc, especially in Czechoslovakia.
The truce ended on the 8th of July. The following day, Israel began Operation Danny. This operation targeted Ramla and Lydda, the two Palestinian towns that remained in central Israel and home to the international airport.
This was a very strategic area, wheat fields, very fertile grain area, and you had incoming Jewish refugees. So you wanted that land not only as territory, the buildings, but you wanted the food.
Just outside of Ramla is this mansion, where as a child, Mazen el-Khairi used to visit his grandfather.
And I remember the garden in Wadi Hnain. The dahlias were so big. One of my uncles had peacocks. Yeah. And it was the jolly old times, as they say.
At the outset of the battle, Lieutenant Colonel Moshe Dayan took a column of vehicles and sped through Lydda, shooting at anything that moved. They left the streets strewn with the bodies of men, women, and children, around 200 in all.
And the place was conquered easily because the Arab Legion only put there one company which left in the middle of the battle, and it was only the semi-regular, untrained, unweaponed local Arabs that had to defend. But a few hours after the conquest, apparently by mistake, a small group of 4 or 5 Jordanian armored cars burst into Lod, turned around and went back. The Lod people thought that the Arab Legion at long last comes to defend them and rose up with their own weapons. As a result, the Palmach people started to shoot around wantonly.
The next morning, around 250 more Palestinians lay dead. Israel's Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, went to Operation Danny headquarters to meet with its commanders, Yigal Allon and Itzhak Rabin. They asked Ben-Gurion what should be done with those who remained in Ramla and Lydda. According to Rabin, Ben-Gurion waved his hand in a gesture that said, "Drive them out." Shortly thereafter, Rabin issued orders for expulsion.
Well, they came into each house at gunpoint, you leave. Each family was taken outside their houses on the street, and then we had to walk into sort of gathering areas.
ואז ברגע מסוים כנראה החליטו לגרש את הערבים משם. וגירשו אותם. ואנחנו ראינו את זה, כי הם עברו בדיוק על ידינו, על יד המשלט שלנו. אנחנו היינו במשלט שנקרא דיר אבו סלאמה, וכל השיירה הזאת עברה על ידינו.
Now we were sitting in Birzeit one afternoon, and then I watched the people of Ramle and Lydda coming, walking all the way from Ramle. It was such a sad sight and very, very distressing.
We were lucky. They put us in a bus, not a truck.
And we were driven to the border, and they started shooting over our heads to make us run.
Suddenly I seen those masses of people going through the checkpoint which we were commanded to man. And they were search for valuables. And that reminded me very much the time when I was a child. We're starting to do the same thing people have done to us as Jews.
We were shocked to see these floods of people, sort of. I mean, waves and waves. I was sitting in my room up on a second floor. We couldn't believe we had to run down and see what was happening.
אנחנו היינו, לא רק אני, כולנו היינו בדיכאון. אנחנו פשוט נזכרנו בגלות שלנו. אנשים הולכים לגלות, זה היה מראה מאוד קשה. וכולנו היינו בשוק. זה היה מראה קשה מאוד.
Everybody, I mean, the school, the church opened their doors, and my aunt opened the storeroom. Whatever we had, whatever was there, we just started boiling eggs, boiling potatoes, making salad, and whatever. And they came just so exhausted. Some of them were even not coherent. The children died on the road. They couldn't cope with the walk. It was a very, very traumatic experience, a sight that I'll never forget.
There were Arabs standing between Lud and Ramle and crying. They want to get back to their homes, and I could do nothing. And I felt very strongly about it because I saw them standing there, no shoes, and now they have to start walking and looking for someplace else. Then came the night, and at night, I don't know how many, 15 or 16 or maybe 10, I can't remember, trucks full of people that just came on the ship from the Holocaust. And they took over the town in 5 minutes. And so the whole tragedy was there in one moment. Here are the Arabs who used to live there, and here people who come from the Auschwitz and Majdanek and all that. And they won, they took the city. And the Arabs had to go to Nablus and to Jenin and it's not that it's right or wrong, but it's just a fact.
Prior to the Israeli attack, 50 to 70,000 Palestinians were living in Ramla and Lydda. Now, only hundreds remained.
They took the elder member of the family. He was maybe at the time, maybe he was 70 years old, and the soldier took his wallet. I remember this very, very well. So, anyway, they took more than the wallet, they took everything.
While Israeli soldiers outnumbered Arab soldiers, there were places where Arab armies concentrated their forces and fought fierce battles. Some of the largest battles were fought against the Egyptians in the south of the country. Kibbutz Yad Mordechai had fallen to the Egyptians in late May, and in July, a major battle broke out when the Egyptians attempted to take an Israeli kibbutz called Negba.
On our side, there was a time when I think there were maybe 10 people still unwounded in the trenches. One after another, the machine guns stopped working. And there I saw a beautiful sight. Egyptian infantry advancing on us in a line, like in a movie. And we still had 2 or 3 machine guns working, so they never reached us. We stopped them about 100 yards from us.
In the north, Israeli units launched Operation Dekel. The main target was the large Christian town of Nazareth, but like most Israeli operations, Dekel also targeted Palestinian villages nearby.
وهاجمون اليهود من طريق حيفا، ونحن ما عنا نقدر، لا حدا يساعدنا من الناصري ولا حدا قدر يجي ولا، فاضطرينا انه قاومنا. احنا هربنا تحت السلاح، دخلنا الحرش وحتى قدرنا نطلع سالمين يعني، حتى في أحد منا تصاوب.
Soon after, Israeli troops captured Nazareth. The next day, the Israeli army issued an order to the commander of Operation Dekel to expel the population. The commander was actually a Canadian World War II veteran, Ben Dunkelman. He had flown to Israel in the spring of 1948 to fight alongside fellow Jews. But Dunkelman reported being shocked and horrified by the order to expel the people of Nazareth. He refused to carry it out.
There were two problems for that operation. One was Nazareth was full of refugees from villages that were already evicted. So the military commander realized that he would have to evict not only the people of Nazareth, but twice the number. He also realized that the world was watching because of the sacredness of the city to the Christian world.
Dunkelman's argument convinced the Israeli leader, David Ben-Gurion, to allow the people of Nazareth to stay. However, Dunkelman was removed from his newly appointed position as military governor of the town. And when Ben-Gurion later visited Nazareth, he looked around in astonishment and asked the Israeli officers, "Why are there so many Arabs? Why didn't you expel them?" The second truce of the war began 10 days after the end of the first. This truce officially lasted 3 months, but while fighting slowed down, it did not stop. The village where Mustafa Abu Ziyad lived was one of the targets of the largest military operation during the truce.
إنه الليل الساعة كذا وكذا بالمناشير نزلت طيارة، والله إني شايفها طيارة حربية، انذار كافي لكذا كذا كذا كذا، الليل الساعة 11 اطلعوا مع شارع عرعرة على شارع على عرة وعلى عرة، واللي بيطلع ما يتلفتش لا شمال ولا يمين، وإذا بروح هيك ولا هيك عن الشارع بروح بموت.
They usually surrounded the village and left one road open, prevented people from going in any direction except in one direction toward the closest Arab state.
مأساة مأساة الشعب الفلسطيني في هذاك اليوم.
In October, the truce came to an end and fighting resumed.
By this time, all the Arab armies had been pretty much defeated, and the Israeli army was the dominant force.
The Israeli army focused on clearing out villages in the 2 parts of the country where Palestinians remained, the Galilee in the north and the Negev desert in the south. Hava Keller arrived in the town of Beersheba in the Negev shortly after it was captured by the Israelis on October 21st.
And we came, wonderful, you came just on time. And tomorrow we are showing out the Arabs from Beersheba. You are going to help. Of course, I'm going to help. The next day I got our gun. We prepared several buses. I think there was 10 or 12 buses. And we called all the Arabs from Beersheba to come to the buses. And I was standing like everybody with a guard, so nobody will try to run away, and all of them will go into the cars and go to Gaza. And there are in Gaza until today.
Nobody had an idea that this is a complete expulsion. It's a kind of war which will stop one day and you go back home. Wars happened all over the world. Towns have been occupied. Countries have been occupied. When the war was over, people got back home. Why should we be different.
Were this just an accident of war, then that accident of war would have been repaired within a few months of the implementation of Plan Dalet by the return of these people to their villages. They were not allowed to return.
החודשים האחרונים של המלחמה היו ניסיונות לא לחזור אולי, אבל להסתנן, לקחת ציוד וכן הלאה.
هلا بعد ما هالفا الخمس 6 اشهر 7 اشهر المصاري اللي مطلعينها خلصت والبلد فيها الشغل واواعينا اللي لابسينها مزعت. شو بدنا نعمل؟ الله ابوي لامي قال لي نازل على فلسطين. كيف بدك تنزل؟ قال لي نازل ونازل على الكابري. إذا رجعت بعد يعني 15 يوم رجعت ما رجعت بتكون انقتلت.
Then one day we got an order to take the jeeps and spread out and to shoot every Arab whom we saw coming in, coming back. And this is what happened.
The thinking behind this was political but essentially strategic. The Arabs, refugees who had been fighting, they were the Palestinians who'd been fighting against the Jews. And they said if we allow these back, they will overwhelm us as a fifth column, or they will overwhelm us demographically. In other words, there will be hundreds of thousands of additional Arabs, and they will become a majority or close to a majority instantly if they return. So the Israeli cabinet decided not to allow them back.
We now must conclude that there was a recognition, at least on the part of that early Israeli government, that the displacement of Palestinians was necessary for what they probably viewed as the viability of their state.
For me personally, it took the shape of an inner decision of myself. You wanted a war, okay. Now you run away, you'll never come back. So the notion of having this land empty of Arabs was already part of my life.
وأمي تبكي وتقول خلاص يعني ما في أمل قتل ومات.
It was a kind of manhunt in a way. I was very happy when Arab made it and disappeared beyond the hill.
I was lying in an ambush. These were Palestinians who came back to the fields to reap the harvest. And one of them was going in the front to make sure that the road is open. And I was lying across the road with a revolver in my hand. And as he approached me, I stood up, and he was a meter from me. He was so frightened that he embraced me. Then I became frightened. I didn't know what he has, a weapon, a revolver, a knife. So I shot at him. And that's a very strange experience. He fell to the ground from my hands. So I was killing a man point blank, just right there. I didn't blame myself. I didn't have any feeling of remorse because I had no chance. I had to do it. It was only natural that I should have reacted the way I reacted. So that's on the other hand. But I looked down on him and I said, poor fellow, you've got it.
بعد شهرين إلا إجا أبوي علينا. نزل من ناحية الجبال وسقط على البلد ووصل للبيت لعنا ولقى البلد كلها مهدومة. سقف البيت كله يعني هيك السقف بالأرض نازل مثل ما هو. كسر البطون ونشر الحديد وبحش الجورة، طال المرتبان الأزاز، كب المرتبان وحمل المصريات، حطن بعبه وطلع.
The human costs of 1948 were high. 6,000 Israelis lost their lives in the war, nearly 1% of the population. Records for Palestinian deaths were not kept, but historians have estimated them to be 2 or 3 times those of Israelis. In 1947, there had been between 500 and 700 Arab villages in the area that eventually became Israel. When the dust of the war settled, all but around 100 had been emptied of their population. 700,000 to 800,000 Palestinians had fled their homes, about 8 out of every 10 Palestinians who lived in the area that became Israel. For decades after the war, the Israeli government claimed that they bore no responsibility for the flight of the Palestinians. Many Israelis still make this claim.
We never wanted them to leave. Nobody told them to leave the area or otherwise.
Don't tell me that nobody was forced to leave home. Everybody was forced to leave home.
There is consensus on the fact that there was a large-scale displacement of Palestinians. There is also consensus on the fact that this displacement was forced. Some people fled out of fear. Some people fled because there were massacres. Some people fled because rumors were spread about massacres. And some people fled because they didn't just flee, they were actually actively expelled at gunpoint. All of this happened. What remains is the question of whether there was a plan of ethnic cleansing that was designed ahead of time and then systematically implemented during the 1947 and 48 war. And on this question, historians are divided.
Now, the Arabs always maintained propagandistically it was a big expulsion. The fact is that most people simply fled the battle zones. In other words, the Jews attacked the militia bases, and during the attacks, or in fear of the attacks even before attacks occurred, Arabs began to flee.
I don't know how much hangs on this. Either way, the tragedy is clear. What historians do know, and that there is no doubt about, is that the war through which Israel was born was a set of events that, with the same breath, were the destruction of Palestine and the displacement of at least 750,000 Palestinians. That is uncontrovertible.
I think that when we talk about the refugee problem, it is not so much important whether we chase them or they ran away. It's not their fault that they wanted to run away. After the Racine and the fear of war, every citizen would run away. So it was not that they deserted their home. They did not deserve, they were forced to leave because of the war. And in those places where they didn't do it, we chased them out, like in Lord and Ramleh.
You have to understand that, for instance, the Jewish villages were spread all over the country, from the Negev to the Galil. You wanted to be connected, to make them one unit. But of course, everyone wanted to get more land.
The fact matters that these people were suffering tremendously as they were running away. Thirst and hunger, and in the great heat, children were abandoned. And then later in the refugee camps, when they came up near Ramallah and suffered for many years and are not terribly happy even today. That doesn't mean that I think that they should come back to Lod. As I full-heartedly agree that I would shoot at them if they come back in, say, October, November 1948, I don't think we will need to shoot at them. But Israel cannot afford to take back millions of Palestinians and remain what it is today, a state in which I want to live.
After the villages in Palestine were occupied in 1948 and the urban neighborhoods were taken, a new state of Israel decided to erase the Arab character of these places. And they did two major things. One was to plant forest over the debris and ruins of the villages. Pine tree forest that would give the places a European flavor and create recreational grounds there. And that they hoped would totally obliterate any memory of a village there. And the other one was to build immediately on the village a Jewish colony, quite often with a Hebrew name that resembled the Palestinian name, in order to say that this was originally a Jewish place that was depopulated by the Romans, actually, but never mind, but someone, and now is being repopulated and brought back to its rightful owners.
So the story that the Palestinians now make a lot out of, the 400 villages that lost their names, is a true story. From our point of view, it's only part of the whole story, which was basically a displacement of one nation by another that laid off territories which were wide open for millions of immigrants that started to come in the 50s to the country and were settled in those lands.
The war came to an end in 1949. On the 11th of May, the United Nations formally recognized the State of Israel.
It was a feeling of creation.
הייתה הרגשת התעלות, בוודאי. שביתת הנשק, הקווים שהוכרו.
The United Nations Partition Plan had allotted 56% of Palestine to the Jewish state. As a result of the war, the State of Israel now covered 78% of the land, all of Palestine, except an area around the west bank of the Jordan River, including East Jerusalem, and a small strip of land around the town of Gaza.
זאת אומרת, ההישג היה עצום, היה בלתי נתפס. איזה ארץ גדולה קיבלנו, או כבשנו, או הכירו בה.
But we couldn't be very happy, and we couldn't be very glad because we lost all these people. And also, I don't remember us being very happy, but the Israelis who didn't fight, who were the parents and the parent generation, they were very happy because the families are now might come and there will be a state, but state is not always a great thing. Fighting for a state is much better than to have a state.
In the beginning, we were very happy about it, but after a short time, I started being not very happy. Where are they? The Palestinians. Are they coming back? Are not they coming back? What will happen now?
Here we have these two things intertwined with one another. The realization of a dream and the destruction of a society.
And the most horrible thing about it was when the war started and the Arabs were thrown out of their villages. Not one kibbutz said that they don't want to take their land. Not one kibbutz. Everybody was very happy to steal their land.
يعني أكبر من مأساة إني أترك بلدي وملكي وأرضي وبيتي وأطلع منه مشرد لاجئ. هاي أكبر مأساة.
Imagine yourself, if you are living in your home, suddenly you find yourself only with a shirt, nothing more. Your past is denied. They say there are no Palestinians. Nobody was living here.
לא היו אפשרויות רבות
זאת אומרת, זה היה או אנחנו או הם, זה ברור, כי אם הם היו מנצחים לא היינו אנחנו פה. ועשו, וכל נסיגה הייתה יכולה להיות סוף של מדינת ישראל, זה לא ש... אז זהו, אז אנחנו לא היינו, ידענו שהם מסכנים, שהם דפוקים, אבל חיינו עם זה. אני לא יודע אם כולם ידעו, אני ככה הרגשתי.
Refugees from the 1948 war and their descendants now number over 5 million. Many have spent their entire lives in the same refugee camps, in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. The tents have been replaced by concrete buildings, but living conditions have seen little improvement. Many of these camps have been struck by war over the decades, forcing some to become refugees 2 and 3 times over. Even now, many Palestinians have not laid eyes on their homes since 1948. But some have managed to find a way back, if only for a few hours. 6 decades after the war ended, Hassan Zubaidi became an American citizen and was allowed to visit his village as a tourist. He found only rubble. But others have found their villages still standing.
والله لو انك تشوف بلدي انا رحت زرتها والله تشوف بلدي جندي ساكنين فيها يهود اوروبيين نقاشين بيعملوا تماثيل وتماثيل وايش من النوع. باجي بدي اطل على الدار اللي كنت ساكن فيها بقول لي شو بدك؟ قلت له هاي والله داري اللي كنت ساكن. قال لا داري ولا دارك، قال دار اللي بسكن. اليهودية بتقول لي اللي بسكن.
The Zionist movement was successful in establishing the State of Israel. But the dream of a safe haven for the Jewish people has not been realized. Since the end of the 1948 war, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has only grown more complicated and intractable. And the hopes, fears, and grievances that drove the conflict in 1948 are still central to the conflict today. Israelis build more and more settlements in the occupied West Bank, and Palestinians continue to be cut off from their homes and livelihood by military occupation, home demolition, checkpoints, curfews, and the construction of a wall that runs deep into Palestinian territory. As a result, Israel now controls nearly all of historic Palestine.
Here's the question. Was the establishment of the State of Israel so important that no matter what price Palestinians had to pay for it, it was worth it? Or was there something fundamentally wrong with a project that can only be realized by displacing hundreds of thousands of people? If the establishment of the State of Israel was a historic wrong, then the question now arises, how does one redress this wrong?